Welcome to part 4. So far I've established that it's extremely likely that Mao is a narcissist and that Annie is his victim. Let's continue with the 4th clip.
I don't want to fight with you. I really would be so happy if we could just stay calm. Remember our safe word, okay? Navy.
Once again, as we saw in part 2, Annie is pleading with Mao ahead of the therapy session, this time asking him to stay calm during the session. As I explained in part 2, this is a typical interaction between a victim and narcissist, the victim pleading with the narcissist not to make a scene ahead of an event. Mao seems to react in a slightly dismissive way, saying, "Annie," gesturing at her and looking up at the ceiling.
Remember our safe word, okay? Navy. Hi.
Hey.
One of the things that we didn't get to is that Mao, he left home at 15. He left for an older woman because this college-aged woman picked him up and bed-bound him for a couple of days. His family didn't know where he was. And it was like his sexual awakening / like that was it. Childhood was over. And he was with this woman and he really never went home.
Mm-hmm.
This was the first person that ever said to him, "You're great at something. You're great at this." It happened to be that she was treating you as this sexual powerhouse child. But that experience, that foundational experience, then informs so much that we have fought about.
So we find out that Mao was sexually exploited as a 15-year-old by an older woman. Annie refers to this as a foundational experience that informs so much of what they fought about, and she may be right to some degree in that this may have precipitated Mao's preoccupation with sex, because it was when he first experienced the benefits that come with sex, whether those would be control and emotional fuel for a narcissist, or things like attachment, recognition, and affection for a non-narcissist. But clearly there's something much deeper with Mao. Their problems aren't just sex-related, they're also about the way he treats her, both in relation to sex and in general. For example, him dismissing her, belittling her, and pressuring her. Narcissism, which I think is a very likely explanation for Mao's behaviour, would have formed several years before this experience at 15.
Okay, I need to hear more, just to know how to understand this piece of history.
Okay.
How old were you when your parents separated finally?
I think probably like 11 or 12.
A person needs 2 things in order to become a narcissist: a genetic predisposition and a lack of control environment during their formative years, that is, up to around the age of 9. Mao's parents separating when he was 11 or 12 may have meant that they had a turbulent relationship during his formative years, and therefore he was subjected to the lack of control environment required to become a narcissist.
And who did you go with?
My mother. I don't think she really took care of us. I mean, we were there, and so we were safe because she was not violent the way my dad was.
So you were safe physically?
Yeah, we were safe physically.
So Mao was raised in a household where his father was violent. This could certainly provide a lack of control environment. It also means that there's a high likelihood that his father was a narcissist. Therefore, his father may have passed down a genetic predisposition towards narcissism to Mao. Bear in mind that many people who grow up in violent or abusive households do not grow up to be narcissists. Sometimes there can be an intervener who shields them from the worst of the abuse, and sometimes they will just be missing the genetic predisposition, so could never become a narcissist. So a lack of control environment makes it more likely that somebody will grow up to be a narcissist, but certainly doesn't guarantee it. In fact, some of the kindest, most empathetic people I've known have come from abusive households.
What kind of mother was she?
I mean, I'm a big fan of my mother's. My mother is, she's like incredibly warm and sweet and vain and thoughtless. I mean, to this day, I think if you were to ask any of my siblings, we'd all agree that we're still waiting for her to take us to the pool 35 years ago. I mean, she never once successfully accomplished like any we're going to do a thing. Like it never
I
happened.
mean, pack up a bag and go to the pool.
And
then,
like there's nothing that ever, and maybe that's unfair. The truth is she had a bunch of kids. She was overwhelmed.
Mao paints a picture of his mother being emotionally distant. Him and his siblings were there, but she didn't take care of them or do anything for them. He also says that she's vain and thoughtless. So it sounds as if his mother wouldn't have acted to shield him and his siblings from their father and provide a stable environment for them to grow up in. Again, this lack of care raises the possibility that Mao's mother may have been a narcissist. Or she may have just been totally overwhelmed, as Mao says, and possibly traumatized due to suffering from violent abuse. We simply don't know enough about the situation to say any more than that. It's interesting that Mao seems to give his mother the benefit of the doubt. After saying that she never did anything for them, he says that maybe that's unfair and that she was overwhelmed because she had a bunch of kids. He also says how he's a big fan of hers, and how she's incredibly warm and sweet, as well as being vain and thoughtless. This could show a level of emotional empathy and understanding towards his mother, despite the poor upbringing he received from her. However, as with every statement, we need to take this with a pinch of salt, because it's very possible that a narcissist could say this too. Just because somebody views their mother in a positive light doesn't mean that they truly have emotional empathy towards them. As always, actions speak louder than words when it comes to these assessments.
By the time you were 15, what was going on at home?
I mean,
You were going to school still?
I dropped out.
But you dropped out around this relationship?
It wasn't about the relationship.
No, but was it around the same time?
It was around the same time, yeah.
So what was going on at home around then?
I think it was just sort of more the same. It was like our house was unsupervised. When I disappeared, I hooked up with this girl and I just went with her, and it never dawned on me to communicate with anybody. I never had before.
About this love affair?
No.
About being not coming home for dinner and then not coming home.
Right, but we didn't have dinner.
But that's what I'm saying, though. I'm trying to just...
Yeah.
I see.
He just didn't come home one day. Like, the thought of one of my kids doing that...
I don't know.
It's, like, unthinkable.
When I did show back up, my younger brother, Rich, he was like, where have you been? And I'm like, I met this girl, I was with her. He's like, oh, okay. That was it. That was the extent of the conversation.
Right, no parent questioning, no older brother, nobody noticing.
I don't know if my mother is aware I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I mean, she may not have known.
That's upsetting. Come on, I mean, we can't joke that far.
Well, no, I appreciate that. It isn't upsetting to me. Having kids of my own, I would be very upset.
I'm just thinking, you would be upset as a parent, but just thinking about the kid.
Yeah,
no one worrying where you are at 15, that's upsetting, or before, that's upsetting, and that's non-negotiable.
Okay. I don't have a sense that, like, things were terrible. I mean, I can understand that I didn't have sort of a typical, or it was not a path that would genuinely lead to success. I mean, we never had enough food. The first new clothes I ever wore were clothes I bought for myself. That was my experience, but because that was my experience, I mean, I could rewrite it, but I don't know what the point would be.
We get a stark illustration of the extent to which there was a lack of love, nurture and communication in Mao's home environment, that he could disappear for days at 15 and nobody even noticed or cared that he was gone. And it wasn't only the emotional side that was lacking from his upbringing. He didn't have enough food or clothes either. This would certainly constitute a lack of control environment. Mao has a nonchalant, almost slightly amused reaction to discussing his loveless childhood. He can recognize that it wasn't a good upbringing, but it doesn't seem to bother him. I would argue that at this point, it's highly likely that the reason for this is that Mao's narcissism is protecting him. Remember that narcissism is essentially a coping and defense mechanism that develops in children as a way to mentally protect them from the damaging environment they find themselves in. which would explain Mao's unemotional reaction to discussing his childhood. He essentially would have locked that part of himself away forever. Of course, as with every single piece of information we receive, an unemotional reaction to bad past experiences certainly doesn't mean by itself that Mao's a narcissist. Many non-narcissists can cut themselves off emotionally from traumatic experiences. This is just a tiny piece of a big puzzle. By the way, some mid-range narcissists will make it seem as if their upbringing is giving them emotional grief, but this is just them using their childhood to triangulate and manipulate people into feeling sympathy for them, because it allows them to control others and gain the all-important emotional reaction, fuel, from them, as well as other benefits. This mid-range behavior would certainly not be applicable to the type of narcissist that Mao would be. His primary methods of gaining control and fuel would typically be quite direct and wouldn't generally involve attempting to gain sympathy. Mao also says, "It isn't upsetting to me. Having children of my own, I would be very upset." This could indicate emotional empathy for his children, which would mean that he isn't a narcissist. But as I keep saying, we have to take everything that's said with a pinch of salt. You'll often hear narcissists saying things such as how much they love their children. But at the end of the day, talk is cheap. People demonstrate what they are through their actions over time. That's the end of the clip. We haven't heard a huge amount from Annie here, but she's continuing in the same pattern of behavior that we've seen, generally being supportive of Mao. I think it's safe to say at this point that it's almost certain she isn't a narcissist. We haven't seen any major red flags from Mao's actual behavior in this clip, to add to the already large collection that we've seen in previous clips. But we have gained the information that he was raised in an extreme lack of control environment, and it's highly likely that one or both of his parents were narcissists. This certainly fits in with my current hypothesis that Mao is a narcissist. If, on the other hand, we had just heard that Mao had had an idyllic upbringing and has a harmonious relationship with all his family members, that would be some information that didn't fit so well with my hypothesis. Finally, I just want to address a point. It might seem as if I'm being a bit callous here in not showing sympathy for Mao's upbringing. The problem is, that's a very dangerous thing to do when you're assessing somebody. The more you start allowing your emotional thinking to take hold, the less you engage your logic. Your first priority must be to make an accurate assessment based on facts and logic alone. If it turns out that you're not dealing with a narcissist, there will still be plenty of time to show sympathy and support for them. However, if it turns out that you are dealing with a narcissist, allowing yourself to feel sympathy for them is a very dangerous thing to do, because your heightened emotional thinking is putting you at a much greater risk of being manipulated and ultimately ensnared. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to like, comment and subscribe.